All right, lessons 10 and 11, we'll look at a new program and then a new part of Photoshop that we haven't looked at before. So we're going to look at something called Adobe Bridge, and then we're going to look at something called Adobe Camera Raw. And these are tools that are going to be essential for any sort of professional or pseudo-professional photographer. So like Bridge is this kind of very robust metadata editing, organizing, photo calling, also export machine program that's going to be necessary for like anyone that has any real number of photos or files that need to be organized and addressed, or any sort of back-end recording of data about them. And then Adobe Camera Raw is a program that's attached to now Bridge and Photoshop that allows you to edit raw camera files. And unlike all the other files we've been editing so far, raw camera files have all this additional color and light information in them that make them really essential for a photographer to get good work or good images, and especially in terms of post processing. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with Adobe Bridge. All right, if you haven't already, pause and download Adobe Bridge. And then in Adobe Bridge, you'll want to either in folders or in favorites navigate to where you have your files at. So, like you could, if it's on your desktop or it's in downloads or whatever, you can just click on this to get to the hotkey spot for it. Or you can navigate down through it to it wherever you've got it stored in folders. Like in my case, I just threw this on my desktop to make it easy for this video to get to where my files are at. And so, like, these are the finished version of the files we're going to be working through. So we're going to edit these raw files from this folder into much more attractive versions of them using Adobe Camera Raw. Now, when we first open up Adobe Camera Raw, just like any program, there's a layout to it. So up here at the top, we have our application bar full of commonly used tasks. So like moving up and down in terms of where we're at in our pathways. We also have a way to kind of jump back to different areas in our pathways. We have Boomerang. We have this little camera icon that allows me to import photos from cameras or from memory cards inserted into my computer. We have this little aperture icon. So like if I have a photo selected, I can use this to launch Adobe Camera Raw. If my auto alignment for the picture failed, I can also very quickly rotate it using these little rotate guys. In the middle, we have our different types of workspaces. We're just going to stick in Essentials, although we're going to customize it here in a second. We have our file pathway, so like where our file is stored on our computer. We have folders and favorites, like commonly used folders should go into favorites. And then, if you need to dig down to somewhere, you've got folders. Down here, we have collections and filters. So like when we apply things like stars and color ratings to it, it gets automatically filtered into one of these. And I can build collections or set up automatic collections to do certain things. Like if I have an image active and I add to its keywords, like wedding or something like that, I can have collections automatically pull up all of those wedding pictures. Or like if I put in bouquet, I can have it automatically grab all my bouquet pictures. Or if I want to grab all my 5-star pictures, I can have it grab all my 5-star pictures. So collections can be very useful. Similarly, export is a way to quickly get stuff out of here in batch. So let's say I have all these pictures and I need to export them at 900 on the long side JPEG and change all the file names to like derpity derp 1 through 50. I can set that up over here in export to do that for me quickly and easily, so I'm not having to do that to each individual image. Then we have our folder contents, and then we have our previews. Let's actually do our first little bit of customization. And I'm going to click and drag preview out. And we can see all these little blue boxes and stuff appearing where it will show up. And what we want to do is we want to drag it over this top trapezoid to add it as a window above my, what we're going to call film strip down here at the bottom, or folder contents. And then I can mouse between the two and drag down so I can look at pictures large as I'm clicking through them down here in this little kind of content selection area. We're not going to use publish. Publish is cool. So like you can set it up so that it will automatically export out of Bridge into other servers or websites and things like that. We're not going to use it, so I'm just go ahead and close it. Quick actions is similar. You can set up quick actions or use their own to very quickly modify images that are common tasks. And I'm going to close this panel as well. The final panel we have, and I'm going to go ahead and switch to the work files, so the files that have been unedited. And the final thing we have over here is metadata. And metadata is kind of awesome. So there's two parts of it. There's what we call camera EXIF information. So like when we were looking at this picture of Lee the puppy, we can see that it was shot at f2.8 at a 50th of a second and 1600 ISO. And so like when I'm trying to evaluate what went wrong with this picture, because it's not very clear or sharp, Probably the problem is that I was shooting with a 100 millimeter lens at a 50th of a second, and that's very difficult to handhold successfully. But we can also see that I just didn't have very much light right here, so I couldn't really shoot faster and still get a decent picture out of this. Versus like this one, we can see that we're at f8, which tends to be pretty good for this camera lens, 45th of a second. That's fine for landscapes. Down at ISO 50, before I learned that I probably shouldn't shoot at ISO 50, I should just shoot at 100 rather than dropping down to 50. There's not really any benefit in most cases. Other things that we can find in here is just general file properties, like how big it is. We also have IPTC core, so this is where you can put in information. So like I put in my website, and I put in a copyright notice that I own the copyright to this image. And this is a searchable thing. So like if I open up other images that I've downloaded off the internet, as long as the website hasn't stripped off this extra metadata, I can view information that somebody else put into it. This has gotten me jobs and licensing before for images that I've posted on the internet. So I'm very good about going through and putting this information in. Similarly, like if I'm a graphic designer and I find an orphan image that I like, one of the first things I'll do, besides a image search, Google image reverse search on Google, is I will open up the EXIF information and see if that copyright information is there. It's also made it very easy for me to find the sources of certain images. Here's more in-depth camera information. So like this is where that focal length for the lens is. Also tells me what camera it was, and it also tells me what camera lens it was. So like camera and camera lens combination. So this can be very useful. If this was shot with a phone or a GPS unit, it'll also give me the latitude and longitude and location of that picture. Other things that you'll sometimes see get put into these, particularly up in here in IPTC core, is it IPTC extension? There's a spot where I can, so I can put in like model information, and I can attach in document information about like where my contracts and releases are for when I have people in my pictures and other problems like that. So like for large agencies, this program will be used pretty extensively to record additional information about individual pictures. Now, whenever you make a change in here, so let's say a creator's website, so like maybe we should just copy and paste my website down to here. When I make a change, it's going to create something called a sidecar file, an XMP file for this image. And I won't be able to see it down here in my bar, but if I go into Finder and we go to this folder, what we find out is there's a bunch of extra files in here. And these are my XMP files. And similarly, when I'm going to be making edits in Adobe Camera, often those will get turned into ACR files in addition to these RAW files, because a RAW file is not directly editable. And so we have these sidecar files that get made to store edits that we make in either Bridge or Camera Raw. Something nice about Bridge is that I can't see those sidecar files, even if I know they're here. But if I move this file to another folder, it will move those sidecar files with it. So any information I've put into this program will be moved by this program when I move it in it, versus if I move stuff around here in Finder or File Explorer, that sidecar file won't go with it. So we can see the sidecar file stayed behind. If I move it back and I come back over here, let's open up my folders and let's just drag this out and move it to chapter 10 this way. And I go back to Finder. We can see that it moved that sidecar file for me. Very, very important, very handy when I am working with Bridge in Camera Raw. So I would move your files predominantly in Bridge. Let's take a look at how we can organize things in Bridge. So we have an individual image, and here we only got 4 images that we're going to edit as part of the book, and then there's these additional do-it-yourself images. But I can assign certain information to them. So like I can right-click, and I can go to where is it? I always have the double time finding it label, and I can apply a color label. I can also apply star rating. So if I hit Command or Control 5, it turns into a 5-star file. If I hit Command 7, it turns yellow. And so go ahead and mark some of these. So it's like if I can say that like this is 4, I don't know, let's say it's red or whatever. And I right click and I go to sort. I can now sort by things like label. I can also sort things by rating. And this makes it really quick and easy to pull out certain types of files as I'm working. Now with just this many, it doesn't really matter. But like if I'm shooting a wedding and I've got 2,500 pictures, I'm going to go through and I'm going to mark all the ones that are in my shot list, and I'm going to go through and mark all the ones I really like as 5s. Then maybe I'll go through and I'll mark the ones that aren't as good as 4s, and I'll go through and make sure that I have at least a 5, or I'll go through my shot list and make sure I have at least all of those images. And if not, maybe I'll go back and start digging around for 3s. Similarly, I can mark ones for deletion or rejection, where it's like somebody blinking. Then later, when I export those files out, I'm going to deliver, 250 pictures maybe out of that 2,500. I'll use that renamer when I'm exporting to number them. So the person I'm sending them to doesn't realize how many pictures I took. They just see the 250. So they don't see, like 249 and 251. And somebody's making a dumb face one of those pictures. It's like, hey, can you Photoshop swap somebody's face over? It's just like, no, you didn't pay me enough to do that to this many pictures. I'll do that for like some of the key shots. But, not, random pictures of, the reception at the end where drunk Uncle Larry's making a dumb face, and you want, sober Larry in there instead. So if you are going to get into professional photography, or you're going to be working for a big company, you will want to spend more time browsing and using Bridge. Even then, I would go through and I would get pretty good about going through and putting in keywords to your pictures, even if you're just an individual, so that you can quickly sort stuff out. That way, like when I'm a wedding photographer, if I labeled one for bouquet and I need to update my portfolio, I can find my best bouquet shots very easily. So, I've got something like 900,000 photo files at this point. And if you stay on top of labeling things, it makes it really easy to find them. Okay, so let's get out of Adobe Camera Raw and let's get into, let's get out of Adobe Bridge and let's get into Camera Raw. So I'm going to click on this first image, and then I'm going to shift click on the 4th image. So I have all 4 of these selected. Shift, by the way, just allows you to select or deselect thing in a series, while holding down Command or Control allows you to select or deselect individual images. And this works within Bridge, this works within File Explorer, this works in Finder. This is a pretty universal thing. To send these to Photoshop, I'd come up to Tool and send it to Photoshop or ACR, or I can just click this button right here to open it up in Adobe Camera Raw. Now, since Camera Raw files are not directly editable, I can't change them without one of these programs. These programs have to convert the file to a normal raster file if I wanted to do additional work on it in Photoshop. That said, Camera Raw and a program that's pretty similar to it, and Bridge kind of combined called Lightroom, do a really good job. Like you can do most of the editing, unless you're going to start combining images together, in Camera Raw. So like as long as I'm not compositing, probably 95% of the work I'll do in photography is in Camera Raw or Lightroom at this point. Let's take a quick look at this layout. There's a number 1 area right here is image preview. We're going to call where we see my individual pictures down here my film strip. We're going to call this area right here my image size, screen mode, and filtering options. So like if I have 9 Gorillion pictures open right here, I can use that same kind of filtering from Bridge. And notice I even brought in that filtering I did from Bridge in terms of ratings. Down here we have our export color settings. Mine is left over from a setting, but go ahead and click right here real quick, and where it says color space, pick Adobe RGB and do 16 bits and click OK. This will be a little bit better of a color space to work in for most photographers. If you really get into advanced photography, or you really get into graphic design, you'll need to learn more about this, but this is a little bit outside the scope of this class. Here we have our rating, same as before. We have ways of comparing pictures, like I can do a side-by-side if I have any edits or other changes like that. Right here is my options for exporting or being done, so I can click cancel and delete all of my edits. I can click done and it will save all of my edits, or I can click open, it will save all of my edits and then open it in Photoshop. And when I say save all of the edits, what I'm really saying is that it's saving those edits to that recipe card. It does not change your raw file. It's just saving that recipe so that when later, if I need to open it in Photoshop, or if I do open it in Photoshop, it looks at the raw file, it takes those ingredients, looks at my recipe, and makes a new file from those two things. Here we have a histogram, which is a visual representation of all of the tones in my image. So this image is pretty dark, so we can see all the tones are over here to the left, versus this one, which is pretty bright, and we can see a large spike over here from my bright tones representing this part of my clouds. We also have our our shadow and highlight warnings. I'm going to go ahead and click these on, but we can see this little area turned blue. And then if it was too bright, we would be able to see areas in red show up where I've hit true white or true black. In photography, generally you want a little bit of true black and generally you want a little bit of true white. So having these warnings on to tell you when you've got them and where they are can be useful. This is an export button. We're going to look at exporting from Bridge later. This is another way to export the files out, and it's pretty similar to what you will be doing in Bridge. This is just preferences. We don't care too much about that. Here's our main editing panel, and we have a couple different modes for editing. We have our general edits, we have cropping, we have removals, we have masking. So this is kind of just like in Photoshop where I'm telling it to only affect part of the image. We have red eye, also known as pretty much never use it. We have snapshots. So this is a way of saving multiple edits. So if I wanted to save multiple recipes from the same ingredients, I could save them right here in snapshots. Then we have presets. I don't really care about presets, but you can set something up as a single button click change. This will be related to like undoing and doing things for AI because now that's saved directly in the file, which is handy. And then we have some more setting options right here in these three dots. All right, so we're going to start off in this basics tab, and we're going to do a couple of edits to this dog image. So first things first is let's evaluate the picture. When I look at a picture like this, I need to identify what I want to change. And so there's three key things here that I want to change. One, the picture is crooked, and I can tell that by looking at this line here in the background. Sometimes you can use a horizon line or a wall or something else like that. The picture is too dark, and I can just see that, but I can also see that it's too dark by looking at my histogram. Generally, you want stuff more like you want stuff further over. And then it's also very blue. So I want to warm this up a little bit so the dog doesn't feel as cold to me. So I'm going to go over to my editing panel and I'm going to crack open light. And I'm going to start by increasing my exposure. So this is, trying to pretend like I had more light into my camera. I'm going to type in 0.75. Exposure works in something we call photographic stops. So if the numbers seem a little weird for exposure, that's why. Contrast, I'm going to bump this up by 5. It's pretty much always good to bump by 5. Once you start bumping by more than 25 or 30, it gets kind of dangerous. We're going to go to shadows. We're going to crack those lower tones up a little bit. And notice while we're editing that we're doing pretty drastic changes and the image isn't really degrading that much. Especially later when we get to this image where we have these blown out skies in our highlights. If this was a JPEG, those highlights are gone. But since this is a RAW file, I can bring that information right back into the picture. This is one of the nice things about Camera Raw. Similarly, when we make this yellow, you wouldn't be able to do that as very effectively with a JPEG. We'd end up degrading the image quite a bit. So Camera Raw has all that kind of extra information that makes it better to edit. Under whites, we're going to do 30. And then we're done here in light. So I'm going to go ahead and collapse it down. And I can click the eyeball right here to see the effect that it's having, and it's pretty dramatic. Next, let's go to color. And I'm going to warm this image up. So I've got a slider right here, and I'm going to type in 9,100. And a very easy rule of thumb is if you move this to the left or right, you'll also move this one to the left or right. It's like if this moves right, this usually moves right, just usually by a much smaller amount. So in that case, instead of +10, we're going to do +15 right here. Under vibrance is a kind of saturation bump, and usually 5 goes a long way. Once you start passing like 10 or 15, also with saturation, once you start passing 10 or 15 either direction, it tends to be a little dangerous in terms of appearance. And we can see again, this is a pretty big shift with very little damage to our image. Next, we're going to open up effects. In here we have texture. This would just add texture or remove texture from our image. I'm not a huge fan of it, although it does interesting things to old people's skin, like the wrinkles of their skin. Clarity is a micro contrast adjustment, which I'm also a huge fan of. I usually bump this by 5 or 10. Then we have dehaze, which we'll use in this one because we have a little bit of a haze on the horizon. And it's very good at removing that haze, but it also you can use it to try to add in like haze. So good at removing, not so great at adding in fake haze. Vignette, this is a artificial darkening or brightening of the edges of the picture. I don't really like to do this here. I usually do that with a ellipse over here using the filters. And that way I can in this case, this picture is centered. But if the dog was over here, I could center that darkening effect on the dog rather than the center of the image. And then grain is a way of adding in fake film grain. Yeah, who cares? Like this used to be really big on Instagram. for making it look like film. Curve, this is similar to the curves tool in Photoshop. We're not going to spend any time on it. If you get really good at editing with the curve tool, it's pretty powerful, but it's not a beginner tool. Color Mixer, we are going to go ahead and pop open Color Mixer. And what we want to do is move some of these colors around. So we have hue, literally what color, saturation, the purity of the color, and then luminance, the brightness of the color. And what I'm looking at is I'm looking at the blues in this image, one, the color and the kind of blue that's prevalent in this greenery. So I want to pump the blues that's in this color. So right here it says blue. I'm going to pump it over a little bit, and now it goes from being a little cyan to a little bit more true blue. For saturation, I'm going to pump up those oranges. So I'm going to do 15 on orange, and then on yellows, I'm going to do 10. And then under blues, I'm going to darken, I want to reduce some of the saturation on those blues, particularly the ones that are in that kind of greenery, by dropping it down by about -10. Then under here, I'm going to darken them a little bit by going to the greens and aquas and typing in -50. And all of these adjustments were pretty slight as we went through them, but when we collapse down Color Mixer and we poke it in the eyeball, we can see that it is a pretty dramatic effect that adds a lot to the image. It removes some of those aberrant highlights, and it really pushes that yellow in the background of those flowers. Other of these tools, which we're not going to use, color grading. If you're really into video editing, color grading will be familiar to you. So it's the same kind of, it's a pared down version of the kind of color grading that you can do in like Adobe Premiere. Detail, we'll look at detail in a little bit more depth when we get to the sky image over here, but this is a way of either trying to add in fake detail or reducing image noise. Optics, we're going to use this on a later picture, but this is a way of quickly removing lens distortion effects that are present in a lot of images. And we're going to use that on this one in particular. Lens blur, this is a way of adding in fake lens blur. So we can see how the background right here is blurry. We call this a bokeh. I can create or emphasize the bokeh by using lens blur, which does it artificially. And it does an okay job. It has trouble with things like fur, which isn't surprising. And then calibration, hopefully you never have to open this, but like this is where you have multiple cameras trying to all play nice with each other that are slightly different, or heaven forbid you're mixing camera brands, particularly Fuji, into any of the groups. You'll be playing with calibration and hating your life as you're trying to get them all to look the same. Okay, so that's our big edits in our edits tab. But the other thing that we want to do is we want to straighten this image and maybe emphasize the eyes a little bit. To straighten the image, I'm going to come up to C for crop tool. And I could mouse over one of these corners and rotate it, or I could slide this guy around and try to get it right. But what's easier than that is to use the line tool, or the bubble level. So right here, I've got a bubble level. I'll click it to make it active. And now this allows me to draw a line. So I'm going to click at the edge of this wall and drag over, and I'm going to line this line up with that wall. And we can see that it's quite crooked. And when I release, it straightens that to be parallel to whatever my horizontal line is. So it'll turn this horizontal line parallel to this horizontal line. I can also use it to do verticals as well. I can click and drag, move this around, and I'm going to center this dog a little bit more than it defaulted to, and I can double click to accept that edit. Okay, next what we want to do is we want to address the eyes. We're going to brighten them up a little bit. So I'm going to come over to my masking. It looks like a circle of dots. And just like in Photoshop, I can do things like select subject, select sky and background. I could say that this is a landscape. But in this case, what I want to do is I want to make a manual one where it's like I'm drawing with a brush on a layer mask. And so I'm going to click on brush. And my mouse is huge again, so mine will look a little bit big. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my brush size to 5, and I'm going to set the rest of these to 100. And I'm going to mouse over one of the eyes, and I'm going to mouse over one of the eyes. We can see these areas marked in red are going to be the areas that are adjusted. For those adjustments, we have a kind of a pared down version of our editing section. And I'm going to go to exposure, and I'm going to increase it by 1/4 of a stop, 0.4 stops. And then I'm going to increase the white tones by 25. Now I can tell that I have a mask present somewhere because I see this little brush representing that mask. I also have this menu up here telling me that I have this mask that I can access. I can add or subtract and continue to edit, and I can also turn it temporarily on and off with this little dropper right here. And we can see that's like, eyes are a little dark. This brightens them up a little bit, and that's not too bad looking. Make sure you leave auto mask off. Mine was off by default. Make sure yours is turned off. And let's go back to our basics tab, and that doesn't look too bad for the dog. So let's go ahead and move to our next image, which is our landscape. And we're going to edit this one a little bit more in order now that we've looked at the different parts of this. So generally, but not 100%, you'll want to edit these in order with a couple of caveats. I like to hop open to optics, and I usually like to crop first because that will change how I edit the image. So in optics, we have two buttons. We have remove chromatic aberration and use profile corrections. And they're both pretty cool. So like if I click use profile corrections, we can see almost like a little circle, or what we call a mustache distortion, appear and disappear in this camera lens. In this case, the 16-35 f2.8 version 2 from Canon, famous for its mustache distortion. Also notice that we lose some darkening around the edges. There was a vignette, a mechanical vignette in this case, that was left over from the camera lens that we are removing. That darkening of the edge in particular can really change how you edit an image, because as you darken stuff, those edges can become much too dark, even if this center area needs to be pushed a little bit further. This other one, remove chromatic aberration, since this is a pretty nice lens, it's not too prevalent in it, but if we zoom in over here on the far right, we can see on these bushes and on this center pivot and a little bit along this horizon line, two colors. We have this magenta and we have this kind of cyan over here. And we call this chromatic aberration, sometimes called crabs online. And what it is as the different wavelengths of light are focused at the edges of wide angle lenses that are against a backlit object, you will sometimes see those little areas of color move out of focus or on alignment, and we get this chromatic aberration. You'll see this with cheap camera lenses. When you're shooting something backlit, you'll see this even with nice camera lenses if they're wide angle and they're outside and it's very strongly backlit. When I started photography, this was a horrendous nightmare to fix. And then at some point, Adobe introduced this button, and people started crying because holy crap, this button is amazing. Like, thank you, Adobe. I love you. I'm so happy you made that a button. All right, Command 0 to fit that back on my screen. So the first thing you should do is decide whether or not you want optics on and off. So I'm going to click this on and off. And looking at this, I think I like this flatter and with the brighter corners, so I am going to have optics on. Let's go ahead and straighten our image. So I'll come over to crop, and I'm going to grab that bubble level again, and I'm just going to click on horizon line and drag to horizon line to straighten the image. And then I think this looks a little bit better if we drag it over to the left. When you're happy with your crop, go ahead and double click. Just like on the last image, I'm just going to start at the top and work my way down in terms of edits. So I'm going to crack open light. And I think the image overall is a little dark, so I'm going to add 0.25. And what I'm really looking at is particularly this foreground. We're going to edit the skies separately in a little bit. Contrast, I think we could bump the contrast up by about 20. We're going to start addressing these too bright of highlights by coming over to the highlight slider and being like -100. Maybe that was a little too far because I lost my true whites. So what I'm trying to do is I'm used highlights to stretch this back down, and then I'm going to use white to bring it slightly back up. So under here for whites, I'm going to do +10. And then for black, I want some deeper tones in here. So I'm going to do -30 for black. And we can see that it just starts giving me some true black tones down here in this bean field. And those edits have started to make this sky a little bit more moody. Let's do a little bit of work on our color. So I'm going to collapse down light and go to color. Under temperature, I'm going to do 4850. And under tint, because I moved the temperature slider to the left, I'll move this one to the left. So I'm going to do 8 instead of where I was at. And I'm going to bump vibrance up by 5 because I pretty much always bump it by 5. Let's go down to our color mixer because I don't really want to do any of these effects. I don't really need to do curves right now. And I want to go down to color mixer. So I've got some pretty powerful control over my image. So here, I want to take my green hue, because I'm looking at this bean field, and I'm going to take those beans -15, make them a little bit warmer, because I think the sky looks pretty good cold. Oh, that looks a little cold. Maybe it's just my screen. Yeah. I think those beans could be warmed up a little bit, so we moved the greens over, and then we're going to do aquas. We're going to bump this over 100. Boop. And what I'm doing is I'm taking some of the blues out of this, taking some of the cyans in the sky. Here, I'll just click it on and off. You can see it. So like you see that slight shift in the sky and it looks a little bit better that way. It's like we're almost adding a little bit of magenta to that blue. Moving down to saturation, I'm going to bump the greens up a little bit by 10. And then I'm going to do luminance to reduce the brightness of aquas and blues. And I'm going to do them both by 50. Although to get started, I'm going to show you one of the dangers of these sliders. I'm going to go ahead and drag these all the way down to minus 100. And if you've got good eyes, you can already see it. But over here, we can see we're getting this kind of nasty fringing. And so if you move some of these sliders too aggressively, that fringing becomes too obvious, especially at larger print sizes. So you want to always check to make sure you're not having that fringing. It's like if you're zoomed out, it's not so bad, right? Let me get out of that window. Oop. If you're zoomed out, it's not so bad. So you want to evaluate it zoomed in to see if it still works at print resolution. And that might be where it's like you do this in Camera Raw, and then you open up in Photoshop and you go through with the spot healing brush tool and you clean up that line. Okay, so looking at this, especially when we saw what this looked like with that minus 100, we could make this sky a lot moodier and it would look really good. So we're going to do that using basically an old style trick from film photography days that's now a filter in Photoshop using masking. So we're going to do two types of masks. So I'm going to come over to masking and I'm going to start with the lazy option, which is sky. Boop. And just like with those other sliders, the sky slider can sometimes create banding. So we're not going to take it too far with select sky. I'm just going to come over to exposure and I'm going to do minus 0.5. And if I turn off show overlay so we can see where it's at, we can see that does a lot for the sky already. That said, this area right here looks great. This area up here looks a little too bright and it unbalances the image. So let's darken this top area as well. So I'm going to create a new mask by clicking this little plus sign. It'll ask me what kind of mask I want. And I want this old trick from film photography days called a linear gradient. You can think of it as like a piece of clear glass. And then and the bottom side or the top side of that glass is like sunglasses. So it's transparent, but darkens. And then there's a little soft edge on it to hide the hard edge. It's like that when you see cars with like that little blue thing at the top and it graduates out, you can kind of think of it like that. And so what I want to do is I want to draw that graduation. And I found for skies, what works really well is to click at the very top. And then I'm going to shift, click, and drag down so I get it straight. And I'm going to drag to the top of that shelf of the cloud. We can see that I'll have an area of full effect up here and no effect down here, getting a nice soft transition through this area. And we are going to darken that by a full stop. So we're going to do minus 1. And then we're going to bump the contrast by plus 20. And if we click the masking on and off, we can see that really makes a powerful, dramatic sky. In fact, let's just get back into this tab so that overlay isn't there. That looks pretty good. Okay, next picture. So we're going to do kind of rinse and repeat. We're also going to look at some things that are a little different in this one. So first things first is we want to evaluate whether or not we want to use our chromatic aberration effects and so on. So if we come over to optics and we turn on remove chromab, yeah, sure. Profile corrections. Yeah, I think I'm gonna leave this one on. It's like I think I like it better on this one. I want it nice and flat. So we're gonna leave profile corrections on this one. Versus like the puppy one, if we come over here and turn profile corrections, like I actually kind of like the vignette in the puppy. The other thing that we want to do with this picture is if we zoom in, we can see that it's pretty darn noisy. So if we crack open that detail slider, we can go through and we try to sharpen it, which isn't going to really work on this one. But what's really going on here is that it's reducing noise. Like we already see that it's defaulting to a 25 on color noise. If we slide that off, we can see this kind of nasty RGB mosaicing in there from the image noise, because this image is quite noisy at 5,000 ISO. Now, luckily for us, one of the big advantages in AI has been for removing removing noise. Because before, like now that we have that set up to 25, we can see it's mostly light and dark noise. And as we slide the luminance slider up, we can see that everything just kind of smears. Now, if we try to do this with the AI tool, we'll get much better results in removing this. We'll still lose some detail, but we get much better results. So we're going to come over here and click denoise. It's going to think about its life for a hot second. And it used to spit out a second file down here, but now it's going to keep it with this guy right here, which is kind of handy. Which is why we now have this little AI button right there. And we can see like it pulled out a lot of that noise, and it did a pretty darn good job. Now we do lose some detail, like we can see some blurring in there, and we lose some of the stars. But overall, like that is much better than we're going to get by putzing around with our manual adjustments on this. We're just going to leave that one alone. Command 0. Next, let's go ahead and straighten this image out. So I'm going to go over to crop. And I'll grab my bubble level, and I'm going to do this kind of dark line right here. And I can see like this dark line right there for my correction. And I'm going to drag this back over for my crop. That looks pretty good for the crop. So let's start doing some editing. By the way, do you see what that is? Look, it's Andromeda. At least I think that's Andromeda. Hi, Nearby Galaxy. Let's do our general edit. So I'm going to come over to light, and I'm going to go over to exposure, and I think it's a little dark, so 25. Ooh, not 25. 0.25. Contrast, big contrast jump in this one. Let's do 20. These kind of night sky pictures benefit a lot from punchier highlights and deep shadows. Highlights, we're going to bring it down because we have a lot of light glow over here from, I think that's maybe, I'd have to double check, but I think that might be Vegas. I don't remember what direction I was facing when I was taking this. It's in California near Anza-Borrego State Park, I want to say. Anyway, highlights minus 50. Boop. And we're going to bring the top tones back up just like we did for those clouds. We have a little bit of those highlights still, and we're going to do 15 for our whites. All right, let's hop over to color. And this is going to be one of the few areas where I think you want to move these in opposite directions. So in this case, we're going to cool it off, 3500. And then night sky pictures really benefit from cooling and magenta rather than cooling and green. So we're going to actually add magenta. So again, opposite directions. Usually you move it the same direction. So we'll go from -5 to 5, and we have a much more attractive, interesting looking sky in terms of color. Okay, let's go ahead and edit the sky just by itself. So I'll go over to masking, I'll click the sky button, and we're going to drop the exposure by 1/4 of a stop, 0.25. And we're going to bump the contrast by solid, well, not 86, solid 50. And I'm going to turn off highlight and shadow warning for a second so we can really look at this image. And like that's not bad. That looks pretty good. If anything, we could also like do another one of those kind of layers to drag one of those graduation filters coming down on that to really kind of push that emphasis. Although let's switch exposure from plus 0.25 to minus 0.25. Minus 0.25. Yeah, there we go. Minus 0.25 instead of plus 0.25 on that high sky. That looks nice and punchy for this. Okay, let's hop over to our next one. And we have some of the same kind of edits what we want to do, but there's no, let's go through them real first. Let's go over to optics. So basics, optics, chromabs, yes. Profile corrections. No, let's leave profile corrections off on this one. I think it looks much better with that off. Now, what we want to do is we want to correct this tilt, which we could just come over to crop and we could grab the level, and we've got a nice edge right here. We can drag along it, and it's straightened. But we can push what's going on here in terms of straightness a little bit more cleanly. So like if we look at this picture, I'm looking slightly up at this water temple, creating a keystoning effect. And so rather than using crop to straighten it, we're going to use a tool within crop called geometry. And I'm going to come over and I'm going to click this little overlapping series of lines. I want to make sure draw guides is active. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line for what would have been the horizon. So I'm going to do that along the top of the pool. And then I'm going to do that also on these sides of these pillars. The pillars taper a little bit, but honestly, I kind of like the slight distortion that's going to introduce on this. So let me see. There's a nice edge. And what this is going to do is it's going to put these lines at 90-degree angles to this one down here, standing this straight up. So like we go from, pretty good looking picture from, where's the way to turn it off? So snapshot, pretty nice. Snapshot, pretty nice. And what it is this place is the Pulgas Water Temple in California. And it is just covered in wedding photographers. So you don't have a lot of time when you're grabbing snapshots here. You don't have time to whip out like a tilt shift lens and use the Seifenflog principle or however you pronounce it to get this correction. You have to do it later. Let's apply some basic edits because it could be cleaned up a little bit further. So basic slider, we'll crack open light, and looking at this, it looks a wee dark, so we'll do 0.35. Let's bring those highlights back down a little bit though, so we'll come over to highlights, and I'm going to do minus 25. These shadows in these trees are a little blocked up, so let's open them up a little bit, so we'll do plus 35. Let's hop down to color, and instead of 5600, let's do 6750. And instead of 19, let's do 25. Kind of gives it almost like this kind of split tone appearance in its color. Let's hop down to effects, and we're going to do 5 and 5, because 5 and 5 always works well. 5 for clarity, 5 for dehaze, especially since this was a cheap 40mm pancake lens. If you've got good eyes, you can actually see right here some little lens flaring on it as well. Let's do some more work on color. So I'm going to hop down to my color mixer, and in hue, I'm going to putz with these nasty looking aquas. Let's move them around by plus 70. So now they're a little bit more true blue. And actually, let's even push the blues a little bit. Let's do 15 of the blues to add a little bit of magenta to them to help match that scene. And that, looks pretty good. It's still separate color from the sky, but it's starting to move closer towards it. Let's bump the saturation on them by 10 and 10. So aqua 10 and blues 10. And you know what? Why don't we darken the blues as well by minus 10 as well? So we'll go to aquas minus 10 and blues minus 10, creating a more dynamic looking image. Like we lose that nasty green in there and it looks a little bit less split toned, and it balances out a little bit better between cool and the warm surrounding tones. Finally, there's junk in the pool. So like if I was like a editorial photographer or shooting for news, probably wouldn't have done about half those edits, but I definitely wouldn't go through and remove these leaves in Photoshop, because that's a big no-no. But in art photography, yeah, this leaf's going away. So let's take a look at a remove tool. So I'm going to click on the remove tool, and I've got 3 in here. I've got remove, I paint over it, and it tries to remove it. I have the spot healing brush version of the spot healing brush tool is a good way to think about this, where you paint over it, and then unlike the spot healing brush tool, I'm going to be able to adjust this later. I really like this version of it. So let me see, where is show overlay on hover. And so we can see what it did is I painted over an area, and then instead of me setting the source by alt-clicking off to the side, I painted over it and says, this is probably what you want to copy over. And if I don't like it, I can move and change what it's copying into that spot. Finally, we have the old school clone tool. This really isn't great for removing things, but like if I wanted to copy this over, I'd probably use clone to do that. It's left over from us old schoolers that really need it, because some of us old schoolers really like it. Now, the big difference here, the big tool that we want to use for the most part is going to be the remove tool, and then we can decide whether or not to use generative AI or just content aware. So depending on the results you're getting, you can turn it on or off. And when we're running through using the generative AI version, we'll highlight an area, and then once we've got a bunch of them highlighted, so let's grab this one too over here. I'll click remove, and it's going to think about its life to use generative AI to remove those. And the more of these I have running, the more of these I have active, the longer it will take to do the removal. And the reason why it doesn't do it right off the bat is because it's like click takes a long time, click takes a long time, click takes a long time. So being able to just run them all at once makes it go a little bit quicker. So I'm going to actually turn generative AI off though, so I can quickly go through and remove any of these leaves that I see. Oop. And definitely remove this nasty little drain thing. I'm going to turn off that overlay so I can see the results that I'm getting. It's like right here, that didn't come out very well. It's like I would probably want to come through and say that didn't come out well. Let's try it one more time. Still didn't come out well. So this is where I'd come over to the healing brush tool. Now I'll paint over it with the healing brush. Let's see where it copies from. Let's actually copy from here. And we can see that that ends up looking much better than if I let Adobe Camera Raw try to decide where to copy from in the case of that particular leaf. And now this looks pretty good. Okay, so we can actually export from, we can actually export from here by clicking on this little box down up at the top. But what I want to do what I want to do is I want to export it from Bridge, so I can look at how I can do multi things in Bridge. So if I click open right now, it would open this all in Photoshop, and I have to close it and save it and things like that. It would basically make something I want to save as a PSD. I don't need that PSD. If I click done, it will save all of these edits that I've done as XMP files, and then super neat, it previews them down here, or ACR files. It previews them down here as edits in my Bridge file, versus like if I go and look at it in Finder, it won't preview those edits. And let me see, where are they at? Yeah, so you see we've got an XMP file for the stuff we did over in metadata, and here's our ACR file, which is our basically recipe for what we did in ACR. And then when we come over here into Bridge, it hides all of those. And again, if I move this file, it moves those additional files for me. All right, so how do I get this into a format that I can share? Because like I can't send raw files to people. In fact, for the most part, you should not send your raw files to people, because those are basically like a currency as a photographer. Like those raw files are yours. Don't give them out unless you really have to. If a customer is asking for them, I'd be a little weary or leery of that customer. So let's get it out of Bridge. So I'm going to have these 4 active, and I'm going to click and drag them over custom export. And it'll ask me what settings I want. We'll leave it as custom export for now. Where do I want it? Why don't we move them to a specific folder? And on my desktop, work files. Actually, here, we'll just put them in this. We'll make a new done folder. Done. And I'll click choose. So this way all my JPEGs will end up in there. File format, I'm going to pick JPEG. We're going to resize them in a minute, so there really isn't any reason to reduce the quality. JPEG, remember, is a lossy format, so you can compress it to make it take up less room, but it doesn't look as good. In this case, there's not going to be a lot of reason to compress. I'm just going to turn that up. Under image resize, we want resize to fit. We want long edge, and for dimension, we are going to do, we're going to do, what do we want, 1200 or 900? 900. 900 to 1200 is a good size for sharing stuff on the internet. It makes it not super profitable to download and print off and try to sell. That said, it will still wander off on social media and stuff like that because it's a good file size for that. But it helps prevent stuff getting stolen and used for prints. Metadata, this is up to you. Like when you want to use these things, usually I'll come over and do copyright only because I don't necessarily want them to have all of that other information. For now, just go ahead and leave this as all. But like if you're working as a professional, copyright only is not a bad version for posting on the internet. Content credentials, this isn't quite ready yet. When this moves out of early access, this can be a good way to help show that this isn't something that was made by AI, or like in the case of these 2 images where we used AI removal tool and an AI denoiser, it will mark those changes to that image and flag it for AI. It's like if somebody was like, you used AI in this, and it's just like, well, I used these tools, which fixed a couple of problems, but the image isn't AI. But this isn't quite ready for launch yet, and it's a multi-company push to try to help show what's been edited and what's been generated and stuff. Go ahead and click Start Export. You'll get a little progress bar right here. You can see that it will go pretty fast because there's just 4 of them. We can now see that we have our done version down here. And if I was going to deliver these, or if I was going to deliver these to a client, this is where I would compress this folder. Or if I wanted to archive these, I would grab them, I'd move them into my done folder. And by dragging this way, again, this is the important thing. I'm not doing it in File Explorer or Finder. By doing it in Bridge, it moved all of those additional files for me. I can't stress the importance of this enough. Now, if I was going to deliver these to somebody, I would come over to where it says done, and I would right click, and I would pick compress to zip. And this makes a zip file. So if I was going to send this by an email, upload it to a Dropbox or something like that, I'm now uploading a single file rather than here, I've got, I need Finder. Where are you, Finder? Versus in Finder, if I look at this actual folder, it's got 15 individual items in it, which means I would need to do 15 attachments, and that would just take too long, 1 attachment. The other thing is if I have a bunch of lossy files in here like JPEGs, this will also reduce the file size a little bit. Neat. All right, so that's it for this chapter. Again, Bridge is difficult, but it is the bee's knees.